Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC building guide, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build a PC in the latest case from Carrara, the TD500 Mesh V2. So the original TD500 Mesh was one of my favourite cases that Carrara have released, and they've made it even better with the V2 version. So really excited to be building in this today. Let's take a look at the other parts I'm going to be building with. For the motherboard, I'm going to be using ASRock's X670E, a Taichi Carrara. For the CPU, I'm going to be using AMD's Ryzen 9 7900X. Keeping our CPU cool, I've got a 360mm AIO from Carrara. It's their PL360 Flux White Edition. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Beast RGB DDR5 at 5600 megatransfers per second. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 NVMe M.2 drive for this build. It's from ADATA and it's the Legend 960 in 1TB capacity. Powering the whole build, I've got a 750W, a fully modular platinum power supply from Carrara. It's the XG Plus 750. For the graphics card, I'm going to be using the ASUS Tough Gaming RTX 4070 Ti. For case fans, we're only going to need one additional case fan for the back of the case, and I'm going to be using the Carrara CycleFlow 120 ARGB in white. Carrara have also sent out their brand new GEMM, which is a magnetically attached multi-purpose device. It can be used, for example, to hold your headset or your game controller. And the final part for today's build is some white cable extensions. Okay, that's all the parts, let's get building. So as usual, I'm going to make a start by preparing the case, and as we go, I'll point out all the case's main features. So looking at our tempered glass panel, it's great to see that we've got the same cutouts that we had before, but the panel has had a bit of a redesign. With the last version, we had thumb screws here and here, which you needed to unscrew and then you could tilt the panel out. What we've now got at the back is a non-captive thumb screw, which we need to remove. And then with it removed, we can simply pull the top panel out from the top, lift it up and away. Taking a look at our other side panel, we've got two captive thumb screws at the back. Once these have been loosened, the panel can be slid backwards and lifted away. Taking a look at our case's front I/O, it's good to see the V2 now has a Type-C port, as well as the two Type-A ports. We've got a power button, a combined headphone and microphone jack, and then we've got a button to cycle through the RGB effects on the case's built-in controller. On the top of the case, we've got a magnetically attached dust filter, which can simply be pulled away. It's good to see that Carrara have stuck with the same polygonal mesh pattern on the front of the case. To remove the front panel, it's just a matter of pulling it out from the bottom. With the front panel removed, you can see the three CF120 RGB fans that are pre-installed at the front. If we take a closer look at this bottom fan, you'll notice that we've got these plastic pegs securing the bottom fan compared to the screws in from the back on the other two fans. The reason for this is obviously if you've ever tried screwing fans in from the back, particularly down below the power supply shroud, it can be very difficult. So Carrara have thought about this. So if you do want to remove these pegs, it's just a simple matter of pulling them out from the front. And instead of the three 120mm fans at the front, you can fit up to two 140mm fans. In terms of radiator support, it's up to a 360mm or 280mm radiator. Fan and radiator support at the top of the case is exactly the same, up to three 120 or two 140mm fans and up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. While at the rear of the case, it's up to a 120mm fan or 120mm radiator. In terms of motherboard support, it's up to EATX, although we take a look at where the standoffs are, an EATX motherboard is probably going to go over these cutouts slightly to the rear compartment, and it's good to see we've got rubber grommets on these cutouts. If you want to go with an air cooler, you'll be pleased to hear large premium coolers up to a maximum height of 165mm are supported. Taking a look at the rear of the case, we've got 7 horizontal PCI expansion slots, and you're going to be able to fit a pretty large graphics card in the case, up to 410mm in length. So the case actually does have a cutout for your power supply, but what Carrara have done is they've given you the choice. If you've gone with a power supply that's a bit on the cheaper end, doesn't look very good, you're not going to want to see it. So you can leave this plastic cover on and hide it away. If you've got a nice premium power supply like we do, simply pop this off and you're going to be able to see it in all its glory. You might be worried about losing this little cover, but Carrara have thought about it. Over to the right hand side of the motherboard, you just need to line it up and push it into place, and that will keep it safe. To give us improved access during the build and simplify the process of installing our AIO at the top of the case, the top panel is removable and simply held on with two screws. With the two screws removed, all we need to do is tilt the top panel up and it can be lifted away. Moving into the rear compartment, it looks like we've got cutouts in all the right places, and I do like the fact that these cutouts down at the bottom come in from the bottom compartment, which is definitely going to help with cable management. When they come in directly from the back, it means the cables are going to have to run up the back of the case, and it can prevent the side panel going back on again. And cable routing space does look to be a little bit limited here. We've only got 19mm of space. So this is our case's built-in fan stroke ARGB hub, and you can see the case's 3 front fans are pre-installed in it. You'll notice that the fan connectors are 3-pin connectors, and that's exactly what the fans at the front of the case are. We've got 1 spare 3-pin connector for a fan and 2 3-pin 5V ARGB connectors. You can see it's connected up to the case's front button, which is going to allow you to cycle through the various effects on the ARGB controller. In terms of the cables coming from the controller, you are going to get full motherboard control. We've got a 3-pin fan connector and a 3-pin 5V ARGB connector. So plug these into your motherboard. Your motherboard's going to be able to control the fan speed of anything plugged into the hub, and as well control the ARGB effects. We're obviously going to need to power the hub, and that's why we've got a SATA connector to plug into our power supply. If we take a look down at our case cables, we've got our case accessory bag here, which contains all the screws and mounting we're going to need for mounting any of our drives. We've got 2 dedicated 2.5-inch drive mounts here, and I absolutely love Cooler Master's mounting solution. We've got these little rubber pads that we simply need to push into the holes. Then into the back of the drives, we've got these little pegs in the case accessory box. We just simply need to screw 4 of these into the holes on the back of the drive. And then all it's a matter of lining the drive up with the holes in the rubber pegs and pushing it into place. And this really is one of the easiest drive mounting solutions. We've got a hard drive cage down at the bottom of the case, and as you can see, there is an extra slot here, so it is possible to move the hard drive cage further towards our power supply. It is also possible to fully remove the hard drive cage, which is the option I'm going to go with. So we just need to loosen this thumb screw here. And then with the screw loosened, we can pull the hard drive cage towards us to free it up and simply lift it out. So we take a look at our hard drive cage. Notice on the top of it, we've got more mounting holes for a 2.5-inch drive, and it mounts exactly the same way as I've shown you. In the drive cage itself, we can fit 2 3.5-inch drives. We've got these little sleds which go onto the side of the hard drive. You notice these pins here, they're going to push into the hard drive, and then all of it is a simple matter of just sliding the hard drive into here, and we'll have one of these on each side securing it. The TD500 Mesh V2 is compatible with full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 200mm, although Cooler Master do recommend keeping it below 170mm if possible. Obviously, if you remove the hard drive cage, you get absolutely loads of room for your power supply. Taking a look at the back of the case, you'll notice we don't have a removable bracket from our power supply, so we are going to have to put it in from the side and then screw it in from the back. And I would take a look down the bottom of the case, you'll notice we've got a tray-style dust filter over our power supply's intake, and for cleaning it's just a simple matter of pulling it out to the back. We're now ready to start working the motherboard, and we're going to be installing our CPU, our M.2 SSD and our RAM before we put the motherboard into the case. To install our CPU, we're going to need to open the slot cover up, so it's just a matter of pushing this lever down and out and bringing it towards the middle of the motherboard, and then we can simply lift the slot cover up. Then we can set our CPU down into the socket. There's notches at the top and the bottom, which are going to line up with it, and we're going to make sure we've got the text the correct way up. Once it's in the socket, just a little wiggle to check it's in fully. We don't want to put pressure on it, where if it's not in right, we can damage the pins. Then we can close the cover over again, and that's just a matter of closing the lever down, and then you'll notice this black bit of plastic will pop off, and we'll put that into the motherboard box so we don't lose it. Next, we've got our M.2 SSD, so it's just a matter of removing the heatsink, which is held on with 2 screws. Then all we need to do is take our M.2 SSD, insert it into the socket at a slight angle, and then we can flatten the drive down, take a screw from the motherboard box, and we'll secure the drive into place with the screw. If you're using the motherboard from new, there'll be some plastic protection here that you're going to need to remove. I've used it before, which is why there's none here. And then it's just a simple matter of returning the heatsink. Next thing to do is install our RAM. We've got 2 sticks of RAM, so we're going to want it installed in the 2nd and 4th slot along from the CPU. So just a matter of opening the clips on these slots. Then we can line the RAM up with the slot. Once we're happy it's lined up, it's just some firm pressure and it's going to clip into place. And then it's exactly the same process with our 2nd stick of RAM. We're going to line it up with the slot and push into place. Next, we can set the motherboard into the case, lining it up with the standoffs at the back. And then it's just a matter of securing the motherboard into place with 9 screws from the case accessory box. You'll notice I didn't tell you which screw to use for securing the motherboard to the case, and that's because Cooler Master have made it really simple. There's only one screw to use, exactly the same screw for securing the motherboard as securing your power supply, and there's the right number of screws for each purpose. The other thing you'll notice, I did this standing up. You will find it a little bit easier to put the case down at the back. The reason I do it this way is to give you guys a better view of things. Okay, next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in, starting off with our HD audio cable, which goes into this header down the bottom left-hand side of the motherboard. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it through the cutout. You'll notice there's a little hole missing on the header, and we've also got a hole missing on the cable. So we need to line it up in the right way, and that is with the HD audio text on the cable facing down the way. So we'll line it up, push into place, and pull the access cable through to the back. Two headers along, we've got a chassis fan header, so we'll bring the 3-pin cable coming from our fan hub through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place, and again pull the access cable through to the back. Again, another 2 headers along, we've got one of this motherboard's 3 ARGB headers, so we'll bring our cable through. You'll notice we've got 2 pins, a gap and 1 pin, and exactly the same on the cable, so we're going to have to line them up the right way round. So once we're happy we've got things round the right way, it's just a matter of lining up with the header and then pushing into place, and again pulling the access cable through to the back. Our front panel connectors are going to go into this header down the bottom right hand side of the motherboard. So we'll bring the cables through, and you'll notice we've got lots of multi-pin connectors here, so we're going to have to make sure we plug them into the right pins on the motherboard, and there's a diagram in the motherboard manual that will help you out with this. So starting off with the bottom row into pins 1 and 2 from left to right, we've got hard drive LED positive followed by hard drive LED negative, so we're going to need to plug the cable in with the text facing down the way. Moving up to the top row, and again working from left to right, pins 1 and 2 are for power LED positive and power LED negative. And then just next to that in the top row, we've got our power switch. It doesn't matter which way it goes round, I'm just going to plug it in with the text facing down the way. And then we can pull all the excess cable through to the back. Next we have our USB 3.0 cable, which is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring it through the cutout. You'll notice we've got a little notch on the header and a little notch on the cable, so it is important we plug it in the right way round. So it's just a matter of lining things up with the header and pushing into place, and then again tucking the excess cable through to the back. Just below that we've got our Type-C header, so we'll bring the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place, and again pull all the excess cable through to the back. We're now ready to start working our power supply, and this is a fully modular power supply. It comes without any of the cables plugged in. I've gone ahead and plugged in the cables that we're going to need. So I plugged in a 24-pin cable, I plugged in 2 8-pin EPS cables, I plugged in 2 PCIe cables, and I plugged in a SATA cable. The reason I plugged in a SATA cable, because we're not installing any SATA drives, we're still going to need SATA power for the case's built-in fan hub. And this is a smart power supply. It comes with a nice screen where we're going to be able to display some information on, so it needs a USB cable, which I've also plugged in. You'll notice I've also plugged in white cable extensions for our 24-pin cable and also for our graphics card. I haven't plugged them into the 8-pin EPS cables, because we're not actually going to see these when we put our AIO at the top of the case, and cable management will be a little bit easier. So because we've got a 4070 Ti, we're going to need a 12-volt high power connector to power it. And this isn't an ATX 3.0 power supply, so it doesn't have one out of the box. So we've got 2 options. We can use this separate cable extension that I've got here, which converts 3 8-pin PCIe cables to a 12-volt high power connector. Out of the box with the graphics card, you do get this adapter. It's got a 12-volt high power connector here and 2 standard 8-pin PCIe cables here. So you are going to be able to work with this graphics card and power supply out of the box. This cable extension, I think, is just going to look a little bit nicer, and that's the reason I've gone with it. What is important, if you are going to use this adapter, it is important that you use 2 separate PCIe cables to power it. What's really important is you don't use one cable that's got 2 8-pin connectors on it and plug it into here. If we take a look at our cable extension, it's got 3 8-pin extensions. Unfortunately, this power supply only comes with 2 PCIe cables, which means I can't use 3 separate cables to power each of these adapters. But because our graphics card isn't that powerful, we will get away with daisy chaining this one and running this from a separate cable. Had I, for example, got a more powerful graphics card like the 4080, I wouldn't be happy using this method where we're using the one cable for 2 of the connectors. It needs 3 separate connectors to power it. And again, I would want a more powerful power supply that came with 3 separate PCIe cables to run it. So just before we get our power supply into the case, this is the power supply's intake fan. So it is important we install it facing down where we can get fresh air from the underside of the case. So just a matter of sliding the power supply into the case and working it all the way to the back. And then we can secure the power supply into place with 4 screws from the case accessory box. Next, we need to get our power supply cables plugged in. So our two 8-pin EPS cables are going to go into these headers in the top left of the motherboard. So we've got a little cutout here to bring them through. And then it's just a matter of lining the cables up with the header and pushing into place. And then we can pull the excess cable through to the back. Our 24-pin cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place. And then you'll notice we've got some cable combs on the cable to help organise the cable. We've got two USB 2.0 headers down at the bottom of the motherboard, so we'll bring the USB cable coming from our power supply through. You'll notice there's a pin missing on the header. There's also a hole missing on the cable, so it is important we line it up the right way round with the USB text facing up the way. And then again, pull the excess cable through to the back. And then we also need to plug the SATA cable coming from our ARGB/fan hub into the SATA cable coming from the power supply. We're now ready to start work on the I/O, and the first thing to do is set our fans onto the radiator. Now, I've already sized this up in the case, and this is going to be the back, so we're going to want the cables coming out the back. And then we're going to want to use these long thumb screws to attach the fans to the radiator. Next thing to do is take a look at the cables coming from each of the fans. So from each of the fans we've got two cables. The first is a 4-pin PWM connector and the second is a 3-pin 5V ARGB connector. So starting off with the PWM connectors, in the pack we get this triple splitter cable. So all we need to do is plug one of the fan cables into each of the ports in the triple splitter cable. So that's just going to leave us with one 4-pin connector, which we're going to plug into our CPU fan header. Next we've got the ARGB connectors, and Cooler Master do include this very nice 5:1 ARGB splitter cable. So we can remove the plastic protection from the cable and take the cable coming from our fan, make sure it's lined up the right way round and push into place. And Cooler Master include these little protective covers which just go over the top, and that's going to prevent the cables coming loose. It's just the same thing for the other two fans. So all we're going to need to do is plug this ARGB header into an ARGB header on our motherboard, or actually because our case has an ARGB hub, we can plug directly into that, and that's then going to control all the ARGB of everything plugged into here. Now look, and we do actually have two additional ARGB headers on this cable, which is going to come in handy if we move on and look at our pump. So taking a look at our pump, we've got two cables coming from it. One is a 4-pin PWM connector, which we're going to plug into the pump header on our motherboard. And the other is a 3-pin 5V ARGB cable, which we can plug into the splitter cable. I'm not going to plug it in now because it is much easier to plug it in once we've installed the I/O in the case. The other option that you do have for connecting this up is Cooler Master include a hub that comes with the I/O. You're going to be able to plug the ARGB cable into here. You've got two spare ports for additional ARGB devices, and then it's going to connect up via USB 2.0 cable to your motherboard, and using Cooler Master's Master Plus software, you're going to be able to control the ARGB. I think just plugging the cable directly into the motherboard is going to be a little bit easier for this build. Next, we've got a little bit of work to do with the pump. We're going to need to put the bracket on to secure the pump to our motherboard. And the bracket that you use depends on whether you've got an AMD or Intel motherboard and which type of motherboard you have. So this is our AMD bracket. So it's just a matter of lining it up with a little slot here and pushing it into place. We've then got these small bracket screws from the box, which we can slot into place. And then all we need to do is screw them into place. And then it's exactly the same process down at the bottom. Then we can set our case's top panel onto the radiator and line it up with the holes beneath. And then we're going to use 12 of these shorter radiator screws to secure things into place. So you'll notice I put all the screws in loosely first of all, and this is going to let you slide the panel into exactly where you want it, and then we can tighten it up. Next, we can set our top panel back onto the case, and I'm just going to set it loosely at the top first of all. Then I'm going to feed all the cables through the cutout to the back. With all the cables passed through, I'm then just going to slide the panel into place at the back and bring it down. And then we can secure the top panel into place with the 2 screws we removed earlier on. And we can then replace the dust filter at the top. Next we can add some thermal paste to the centre of the CPU. Again, you might find it easier lying the case down on its back. We've got some plastic protection on the back of the cold plate we need to remove. And then it's just a matter of getting the pump installed over the stock motherboard clips. Before I do, I'm just going to tuck these cables in underneath the top clip to help route them up to where I want them to go. And then I'm just going to try and get the top clip over the bracket at the top. Okay, so that's it over the bracket at the top. Just making sure these cables are well away from the cold plate. And then we just need to get the bottom clip over the bottom bracket. Okay, so that's it over the bottom bracket. It's a little bit fiddly, but we've got there. And then it's just a matter of tightening up the thumb screws together. So I'm just going to tuck the cables round to the back here. The next thing to do is get the cables plugged in. So as I've mentioned, we want to plug this into our pump header. There's 3 fan headers at the top of the motherboard and the middle one is the pump header. So we can line this up with the header and push into place. And then we're just going to tuck the excess cable through to the back. The RGB cable I'm just going to pass through to the back for now. And then I can bring the triple splitter cable with the fans on the radiator back through and plug it into our CPU fan header, which is the header just to the left at the top. And then again, we're just going to push all the excess cable through to the back. And then we've got some plastic protection here we can remove. At the back of the case, the RGB cable coming from our pump, we can simply plug into the splitter cable that we already plugged our fans into. There we go. And then we'll put the protective covering on to prevent things coming loose. As I've already mentioned, we have a few options for this. We can plug this directly into our motherboard, but because we've got this RGB controller with 2 spare RGB connectors on it, I'm just going to plug in to one of these. It's just a matter of lining things up and pushing into place. Next, we've got our rear case fan to install. So the first thing to do is pass the cables through to the back. And then we can secure it into place at the back with the screws that came with the fan. So my plan had just been to plug both the cables coming from the fans into the hub because we've got one spare 3-pin fan connector and a 3-pin 5V RGB connector here. The only slight problem is the cables are actually too short to reach the hub. So what I have got is a cable extension for the fan cable, so we'll plug it into here. And then I'm just going to route this cable over towards the hub and plug it in. You'll notice we've only got 3-pin connectors. This is a 4-pin fan that I've got at the back. The 4-pin means it can run PWM, but to do that you would need to plug it into a 4-pin header. This is only a 3-pin header, which means we're going to have to run it in DC mode in the motherboard BIOS. So whenever we set this up in the motherboard BIOS, we're going to have the header on the motherboard that we plugged the fan hub into running in DC mode. So all we want to do is plug it in. And you'll notice there's 3 pins here. You might wonder which 3 pins do I plug it into. You don't have a choice. There's little notches here, so it will only go into the right 3 pins on the header. If you don't want to use this extension cable, you can of course just plug this fan directly into the motherboard. And it's also really nice the Cooler Master have given us a 5-to-1 splitter cable because we're going to be able to plug our rear fan into this cable. There we go. And with the fan we get another one of these little connectors which we can push over just to prevent things from coming loose. We are now ready to install our graphics card, and we're going to need to remove the 3rd and 4th slot cover from the bottom. In most motherboards it's going to be the 2nd and 3rd slot cover from the bottom, but because our top PCIe slot on this motherboard is a little bit lower down, it's the 3rd and the 4th that we're going to need to remove. Then we need to open the clip on the top PCIe slot. And then it's just a matter of inserting our graphics card and lining it up with the slot at the back. Once we're happy everything's lined up correctly, it's just a bit of firm pressure to the graphics card and it's going to slot into place and the clip at the back will close. And then we can secure the graphics card with the 2 screws we removed earlier on. We can then bring our 12V high power cable through the collet at the bottom. This cable is slightly different than the one I had shown you earlier on. It's exactly the same 3 connectors in the 12V high power connector, but this one's from Cable Mod and I have been waiting for it to arrive, and literally as I've put the GPU in, the cable has arrived at the front door. So I've swapped it out from the other one that I was going to use, and this way this cable and this cable are going to match much easier. So all we need to do is line our cable up with the graphics card. And I got a nice satisfying click when I pushed that in. What's really important is we want to make sure we've got the cable inserted all the way, particularly with these new 12-volt high power connectors. The other thing is we don't want to bend the cable directly next to the graphics card. So we do have some cable combs here. We're just going to use it to help organize our cable. Okay, last thing for us to do is some cable management, so we're able to get the side panel back on again. So that's the build complete and looking absolutely amazing. You'll notice I've gone ahead and set the PC up off camera. The reason I've done that is I've made a full step-by-step build guide showing the Windows installation, installing the drivers, the RGB software with another ASRock X670E motherboard. And the process for that motherboard and this motherboard is exactly the same, so I don't want to duplicate things. I'll put a link to that video in the description. There's a few slight differences between this video and that one, and I'm going to point these out to you now. The first thing to be careful of is the fans in this build are 3-pin fan connectors in the fan hub. So when you go into the motherboard BIOS, make sure you run that particular fan header that you plugged it into in DC mode. If you run it in PWM mode, the fans will run at 100%. The next thing to be careful of is when you're managing your cables, we have a large cutout at the front, so make sure that you've got them all pushed in at the back here so you can't actually see them. And the third thing to mention is the RGB. All these cases work in a slightly different way. I didn't see anything in the manual about how the RGB controls when you plug in the cable to the motherboard. I've tested this out for you. How it basically works, if you plug the cable coming from the RGB controller into your motherboard, the button on the top of the case does absolutely nothing and it will sync up with your motherboard. If you want to use the button on the top of the case to control the RGB, you simply don't plug the RGB header into the motherboard. And whenever I unplugged it, then I was able to press the button on the top of the case to cycle through the various RGB effects. So what I'm going to do now is some thermal testing, and then I'm going to do a full case review. So you want to find out what I thought about the TD500 Mesh V2, you're going to want to check out that video, and I'll put a link to it in the description. So hopefully you have enjoyed this build guide. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up, and if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.